Hi, I want to talk about the subject of comedy and humor, and I'm sort of putting those in the same bracket, and freedom of expression. And this is particularly thinking of controversial comics, comedians, whether they be stand-up comedians, usually that's the case, or others, and when they get criticized, and how it translates into the whole freedom of expression argument. Because I have noticed a trajectory. It goes something like this: controversial comedian, or any comedian for that matter, but usually comedians that are better known for being controversial. They make an edgy, dark joke that might be quite inflammatory. Um, they get criticized. Their defenders then respond, "Oh, it's just a joke. Just have a sense of humor." That really annoys me because I think it's short-sighted, and I think it's frankly a lazy argument. And this is why. The thing with comedy and the thing about being controversial is the main defense argument, and it's a very valid one, is that in a free society, people should have the right to offend. They should have the right to be controversial. But here's the bit that the apologists and the defenders miss. When they immediately jump to defend the comedian, this is the bit they overlook. Freedom of expression in a free society also includes the right to criticize. It includes the right for critics of the comedian to say, no, I think he's wrong. I think that was tasteless. I think that was callous. That's also freedom to criticize. So telling those people that, oh, just have a sense of humor, it's a stupid argument because people have different senses of humor. Um, well, don't listen then. It's, guess a fair enough response. But sometimes, if they're particularly high profile, you can't avoid it. It's not like it's just some stand up in a town hall somewhere that's, you know, kind of obscure. If they're a particularly famous or prominent comedian, then it's not really reasonable to say, oh, just don't listen to them because it's going to get attention. It's going to be in the public domain. So inevitably people are going to be aware of it. Let me give a few examples of the sort of situations where I think it is unreasonable to expect people to just be passive. Well, I'll give some actual examples, real world situations. Roy Chubby Brown in the 1980s, 1985 to be precise, hours, I'm not talking days or weeks, hours after the Bradford City fire. This was one of our worst ever sporting disasters. You'll recall 1985, 56 people died when a big fire broke out at the Valley Parade Stadium in Bradford. Hours after that, Roy Chubby Brown came out with a joke. No one invited me to the barbecue. And of course, his fanboys will think that's hilarious. It's his very dark, acerbic sense of humor. But my take would be, well, that's just a cheap shot. Um, it's not even a sort of joke that's the failure of stadiums to improve safety standards or anything like that. It was just a cheap shot. And I think it is ridiculous to expect. I don't know if there were survivors, incidentally, of Bradford who heard that and who were angry. I imagine there would have been. I'd be very, very surprised if no one involved in the Bradford disaster who heard that joke would be not bothered by it. So if you've lost loved ones in a disaster, um, the idea that you should just have a sense of humor is preposterous. It's expecting people not to be human. It's an absolutely moronic argument, actually. Um, Similar thing happened a few years ago after the Grenfell fire. Some idiots decided to make a barbecue and they done this silhouette in the shape of Grenfell Tower and had little silhouettes jumping out of it, and they got a lot of criticism. And again, people would say, "Oh, it's just a sense of humor." But this was, I think, actually in that case, they were charged with a public order offence. And I remember at the time, I supported that charge, and this is why. You can't you can't say that it's just an expression. If people are doing something that they know will be hurtful, that's a deliberate. way of trying to hurt other people. I think it's different if it's more generic, if it's like edgy humor that is aimed at a more generic sort of thing. So I was just debating this with someone, and he mentioned like during the Troubles, he's actually a serving soldier, or rather, he served, and he was injured in a bombing in Belfast, and he was very much coming down as very libertarian side of things. And I said, well, look, I would not expect you to find humor in people making a joke about that. You would be under no obligation to find that funny. He hasn't replied yet, but this is the sort of situation, where it's the onus is put on the critics or on the critics to just say, oh, well, just have a sense of humor. Freedom of speech isn't just the right to pontificate your own views or your own sense of humor, it's also the right to criticize others. And comedians cannot whine about being picked on if they're being deliberately provocative. They can't just bleat about, oh well, just have a joke, it's a sense of humor. When they know what they're doing, they know what they're doing is provocative. They have to frankly man up and accept that there will then be a backlash. Now, when I talk about backlash, I'm talking about vocal criticism. I'm not talking about them being charged or censored or anything like that. In the case of the Grenfell example, that was very specific because it was done in North Kensington, in the very place where it happened. Now, that is different from a generic sort of joke that was made elsewhere. I think there are certain situations where you just have to look at common sense and think, well, is this really just edgy humor, or is it actually hurting people? Is this actually intended to hurt people? And I think sometimes there's a difference between satire or edgy humor and jokes deliberately trying to be cruel. I mean, in my opinion, those sort of comedians are no better than schoolyard bullies, who pick on the new kid. It's hardly, it's disgusting, and I say I've got a freedom to criticize it. Doesn't mean I don't have a sense of humor. And if you're one of the fanboys who immediately defends controversial comedians. I mean, a recent example would be Frankie Boyle. His fanboys are always out in pitchforks every time he gets criticized. Oh, just have a sense of humor. But my retort would be, if this is about freedom of speech, then why should comedians be the only people who can say what they want without responsibility? If anyone else said it, anyone, they would get criticized. If it was a sports person, a politician, a business person, a singer, if they said something controversial, there'd be a backlash. So why should comedians be able to hide behind their interpretation of comedy? I mean, you could literally, under this argument, this is where it gets ridiculous. If you really think about it, under this argument of free speech absolutism, you could say that a comedian could, in theory, it probably wouldn't happen, but in theory, a comedian could literally go up to a grieving relative at a funeral and say, oh, by the way, your husband, your son, your daughter, whoever it is, they were a complete loser, you know? And they're even, make some joke about their body size or whatever it might be. Now, can anyone with a straight face say that the relative would not have a right to be infuriated and even lash out? I would. If I'd lost a relative in tragic circumstances, and some comedian used that specific incident to take a pot shot at them, a cheap shot, I would be pissed off. And who could judge me for being pissed off? That's what bothers me about this, is the defenders of these comedians just seem to think that everyone should just be chillaxed about it, that it should just be, oh well, let's just use it's a sense of humor and everyone should be blasé about it. I don't agree with that because it totally takes away that human component. That doesn't mean that I support, a sort of Mary Whitehouse approach. Let's just purify everything. Let's have no edgy humor. Of course not. In fact, I recognise that edgy and dark humour can have a place. After September the 11th, apparently there were a lot of stand-up comics in New York City making jokes about the attacks, um, which, some people would interpret as tasteless, but some of them had themselves lost loved ones, and it was a coping mechanism. So I do understand that. But I very much doubt that Roy Chubby Brown was coming out with his Bradford joke as a coping mechanism. He came out with it because it was a cheap shot. And there's been examples since. Frankie Boyle, who, as far as I'm concerned, is a nasty little code, can't stand the man. Um, in pretty much every more way than one, but that's beside the point. He's taken shots at Katie Piper's disabled son, mocking children who can't defend themselves. I think is a scumbag thing to do. I really do. Um, I'll give another example. Family Guy. Now, I think I've done a review of Family Guy, the popular American adult cartoon series. Family Guy is famous for its quite biting sense of humor, and I think sometimes it is genuinely funny. Now, what my take on Family Guy, my issue is not generic jokes, like generic racist jokes, because it's aimed at everyone. It's not aimed at individuals. So when it comes to edgy humor, if it's generic, I'm not that bothered because it's this nasty, basically. But I remember they had a sketch on the Shivo case. This was a prominent euthanasia case in 2006, and Seth MacFarlane decided in one of his sketches to really take swipes at the Shivo family. Now, to me, that was just vile because they were ordinary citizens whose circumstances had become, you know, highly publicized, highly prominent. They weren't powerful business people or politicians or something like that. They were ultimately ordinary people who were caught up in this very difficult legal battle. And Seth MacFarlane, with all his power, decided to take a cheap shot at it. Because that's another thing people overlook. Some of these top comedians they have legions of supporters. They're in a powerful position. And in my view, they're abusing that when the material they use is just aimed at trying to hurt people. It's Cardis, and then they hide behind comedy. So there's times I think Family Guy has went too far. When it's another thing is like when Seth MacFarlane has this thing about female celebrities. I've noticed he'll sort of take cheap shots at their appearance. Sometimes male celebrities too. But to me, again, that's like it's not clever. It's just like an ad hominem. It's not even a joke at their personality, which I think is totally legitimate. So summed up, I'm not square. I definitely can appreciate edgy humor. I've laughed myself at that sort of stuff where it's, a little bit dark, a little bit edgy. I totally get that. But what I don't agree with is this stupid and lazy argument that comedians can say what they want without responsibility because, oh, it's just comedy. I think it's a stupid and lazy argument because it's taking away the human component of people they may be hurting. And it's also taking away responsibility. It's saying that, oh, well, the critics should just shut up. What about their right? What about their freedom of speech? That's the bit that's overlooked. And a final point about, what is being hurt and what isn't. There are Islamists who will say that they have a right to be enraged whenever the Prophet Muhammad is offended, or as they see it, is his character is questioned. And that's how they justify their fanaticism. In countries like Pakistan, when there is such extreme intolerance towards minorities and purported apostates, and Imran Khan has used this as an excuse, so have other Islamist leaders. Um, it's like offending a family member, but everyone has responsibility for their own actions. And when it comes to religious fanaticism, my retort there would be, well, what does that say about Islam? if it is so fragile and so sensitive that you believe in slaughtering people for offending the Prophet who died 1,300 years ago, as you see it. I mean, surely you should be saying, actually, Islam's a very confident religion. We don't need to get so enraged because Muhammad's a great man and we don't need to, be so vocal on his behalf in that way. And there's other examples of this. There's Majest laws in Thailand. When Thai royalists get so extreme that they're prepared to kill people because they've allegedly committed lèse majesté, criticism of monarchy. So sensitivity can also be a very dangerous thing. I recognize that. Um, but that doesn't mean that people don't have responsibility in things that they say. We all do. And in my opinion, that includes comedians. No, I'm not saying comedians should just sanitize. That is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying they should just, be nice and gentle and never, they're going to offend people. I get that. But what I'm talking about is there's a difference between offensive material and willfully cruel material. I do think there's a difference. So offensive material might be something that's racist. But I don't see how that can be personal because it's not naming a particular individual. For example, if it's a generic racist joke, might be inappropriate, but I don't think that is in the same category as making fun of a specific disaster. Let me know your thoughts, and I do hope if you disagree with me, I just hope you've listened to this. Sometimes people, you know, jump to responses without actually listening. Thanks for watching.